Rejected Omega fed a pup every day. One day, 4 black wolves pulled up to her cabin. The forest didn't whisper in the borderlands. It screamed. It was a jagged expanse of ice and ancient pine where the rejected went to disappear, and Imogen Ashridge had mastered the art of being invisible. She didn't mind the silence or the biting cold. They were kinder companions than the pack that had cast her out. But 3 weeks ago, the silence had broken. Not by a monster, but by a whimper. A scrawny, trembling thing, a black wolf pup with eyes too old for its skull, had crawled onto her porch. Every day since, she gave it half her dinner. She didn't know she was feeding a king. She didn't know she was feeding the end of her world. The wind rattled the thin panes of the cabin window, a sound like skeletal fingers tapping against the glass. Imogen Ashridge didn't flinch. She sat by the cast-iron stove, the only source of warmth in the derelict trapper's shack she now called home, wrapping a strip of linen around her frost-bitten fingers. She was the wolfless. That was the name Phineas Greywell had spat at her the night he broke their mating contract. In the hierarchy of the Silver Pine Pack, being an Omega was low, but being an Omega who couldn't shift, that was a sin against nature. "You are a genetic dead end, Imogen," Phineas had said, his voice smooth as polished glass, standing in the center of the packhouse hall while the elders watched with indifferent eyes. "I need a mate who can give me strong heirs, not a human in wolf's clothing." It had been a year since that night, a year since she was stripped of her pack name, given a rucksack of supplies, and pointed toward the deadwoods, the lawless territory between the chaotic shifting zones and the human world. Most rejected wolves died within the first winter. Imogen had refused to give them the satisfaction. She stood up, her joints popping in the cold, and moved to the small wooden table. Dinner was meager, a broth made from dried roots and the last grim remnants of venison jerky she had bartered for in the human town 10 miles south. She ladled the soup into 2 bowls, one for her, one for the guest. Walking to the heavy oak door, she unlatched it. The wind howled, blowing snow into her small sanctuary. There, huddled beneath the overhang of the porch, was the pup. He was a strange creature. His fur was matted and darker than midnight, not the grey or brown typical of the local packs. He was too large to be a normal wolf cub, yet too clumsy to be an adult. But it was his eyes that unsettled her. They weren't the milky blue of a newborn or the warm amber of a common shifter. They were violet, rimmed with a terrifying electric gold. "You're late," Imogen whispered, the wind stealing her voice. The pup didn't whine. He simply stared at her, a profound intelligence radiating from his shivering frame. He didn't wag his tail. He sat with a rigid, almost regal posture, despite his ribs showing through his coat. Imogen placed the cracked ceramic bowl on the floorboards. "Eat. It's not much, but it's warm." She watched as the pup approached the bowl. He didn't gorge himself like a starving animal. He ate methodically, his ears swiveling to track the sounds of the dark forest. "I don't know where you come from," Imogen murmured, leaning against the doorframe, hugging her threadbare cardigan tighter around herself. "But you're like me, aren't you? Left behind." The pup paused, lifting his muzzle to look at her. For a second, Imogen felt a strange pressure in her head, a static buzz that felt like a radio tuning between stations. It was the pack link, or what felt like one. But hers had been severed by the Silver Pine Alpha. She shouldn't be able to feel anything. She shook her head, dismissing the sensation as exhaustion. "Go on. Finish up. A storm is coming tonight." The pup licked the bowl clean. Then, instead of retreating into the woods as he usually did, he took a step toward her. He nudged her frozen hand with his wet nose, A spark, literal and hot, jumped from his fur to her skin. Imogen gasped, pulling her hand back. The pup let out a low, rumbling sound. It wasn't a growl. It sounded like a purr, deep and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards. Then he turned and vanished into the swirling white void of the night. Imogen stood there for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at her hand. The frostbite on her knuckles, which had been stinging for days, was gone. The skin was pink and knit together. "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty dark. Inside the cabin, the shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for her. She locked the door, sliding the heavy bolt home. But for the first time in a year, the cabin felt less like a prison and more like a waiting room. Something was changing. The air tasted of ozone and ancient magic. She went to bed, but sleep was elusive. She dreamed of 4 obsidian pillars rising from the snow and a crown made of bone and blood resting on her pillow. The next morning brought a sky the color of a bruised plum. The temperature had plummeted, turning the snow into a crust of ice that crunched loudly under Imogen's boots. She was out early, checking the snares she'd set along the ridge. Empty. Again. She sighed, her breath pluming in the air. If she didn't catch a rabbit soon, she and the pup would be eating pine needle tea for dinner. Pathetic. The voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Imogen froze. She knew that voice. She turned slowly to see a figure standing on the ridge above her, silhouetted against the grey sky. Helene Crestbrook. Helene was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, hard, cold, and capable of cutting you. She wore a pristine white parka, fur-lined with Arctic fox, a stark contrast to Imogen's patched wool coat. Helene was the beta female of Silver Pine, the woman Phineas had chosen the moment he discarded Imogen. "What do you want, Helene?" Imogen asked, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Helene picked her way down the slope, her movements graceful and predatory. 2 male enforcers from the pack flanked her, smirking as they looked at the wolfless Omega. "Phineas sent me," Helene said, stopping a few feet away. She wrinkled her nose. "He heard rumors. Hunters saw tracks near your shack. Big tracks. He's worried you're harboring rogues." "I live alone," Imogen said. "You know that. No rogue would bother with me." Helene stepped closer, invading Imogen's personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and the musk of the pack house, a scent that used to mean home to Imogen, but now triggered a nausea of grief. "We checked the perimeter," Helene said, her eyes narrowing. "We found signs of something. Not a normal wolf. Too heavy." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you are hiding something, Imogen, Phineas won't just exile you this time. He'll hunt you for sport." Imogen held her ground. "There is no one here, just me and the cold. Go back to your warm fire, Helene. Leave me to die in peace." Helene laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, we don't want you to die, sweetie. You're the perfect cautionary tale, the broken toy." She reached out and shoved Imogen. It wasn't a hard shove, but the ice was slick. Imogen lost her footing and fell hard, her hip striking a hidden rock. Pain flared, hot and blinding. The enforcers chuckled. "Oops," Helene smirked. "Clumsy, just like when you tried to shift." Suddenly, a sound tore through the clearing. It came from the tree line. A snarl, but not just a snarl, a chaotic, layered sound, like metal grinding on stone. The black pup burst from the underbrush. He moved with a speed that defied his small size, placing himself between Imogen and the Silver Pine wolves. His hackles were raised, making him look twice his size, and his teeth were bared. The 2 enforcers laughed. "Look at that," one said. "She found a rat." "Kill it," Helene commanded, looking bored. "It's probably diseased. One of the enforcers, a burly shifter named Kale, stepped forward, his hand shifting into a clawed paw. He swung at the pup, intending to backhand it into the snow. The pup didn't flinch. He didn't dodge. He snapped. His jaws clamped onto Kale's wrist with a sickening crunch. Kale screamed, a high-pitched sound of shock and agony. The pup held on, thrashing his head, and for a split second, a shockwave of black energy pulsed outward. Kyle was thrown backward, flying 10 feet through the air before hitting a pine tree with a bone-shattering thud. He slid down the trunk, unconscious. Silence descended on the clearing. Absolute, terrified silence. Helene stared at the pup, her face pale. The pup released his bite, spitting out a mouthful of blood that wasn't his. He stood over Imogen, his small chest heaving, his violet eyes glowing with that terrifying gold rim. He looked at Helene with an expression that was entirely human in its contempt. What is that?" Helene whispered, backing away. The pup barked, a deep, booming sound that echoed like thunder. Helene looked at her fallen enforcer, then at the strange, demonic puppy, and finally at Imogen, who was staring in shock. "You're dead, Imogen!" Helene hissed, her voice trembling. "Phineas will burn this forest down to kill that thing." She signaled the other enforcer, who grabbed the unconscious Kyle. They retreated, scrambling up the ridge with none of their previous grace. Imogen lay in the snow, her hip throbbing. The pup turned to her. The golden glow faded from his eyes, leaving them soft and worried. He whined, nudging her face. "You shouldn't have done that," Imogen wept, burying her face in his dark fur. "They'll come back. They'll kill us both." But as she held him, she felt it again. The static, the connection, and deep within the recesses of her mind, a voice that was not her own spoke, a single, guttural word. "Mine." 2 days passed. The tension in the valley was thick enough to choke on. Imogen spent the time fortifying the cabin, though she knew it was futile. If the Silver Pine pack attacked in force, her rotting wooden walls would be nothing more than kindling. The pup, whom she had started calling Shadow in her mind, though it felt woefully inadequate, stayed close. He refused to leave the cabin. He slept by the door, his ears twitching at every gust of wind. He was growing, too. Fast. Since the encounter with Helene, he seemed to have doubled in bulk, his shoulders broadening, his puppy fuzz replaced by sleek, coarse guard hairs. It was late afternoon on the 3rd day when the atmosphere shifted. The birds stopped singing. The wind died instantly, leaving an eerie stillness. Imogen was chopping firewood, the axe heavy in her hands. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow despite the freezing temperature. She felt it before she heard it. A vibration in the ground, a low, rhythmic thrumming that grew steadily louder. Engines, but not the rattling trucks of the locals. This was the purr of precision engineering. Imogen dropped the axe. She ran to the porch, her heart leaping into her throat. Shadow was already there, standing on the edge of the steps, his tail held high, vibrating with anticipation. "Run!" Imogen whispered to him. "Shadow, run into the woods. Hide!" He ignored her. He looked down the long, winding dirt track that led to the main road. Around the bend they appeared, 4 vehicles, matte black, massive. They were customized, armored SUVs, looking like tanks bred with luxury cars. They tore up the snowy track with terrifying ease, their tires chewing through the ice. They moved in a diamond formation, precise and military. They didn't belong here. This was the wilderness. These were machines of war and wealth. The convoy slowed as it reached the clearing. The silence returned, heavier than before, punctuated only by the ticking of cooling engines. The tinted windows were impenetrable black mirrors. Imogen backed up until her spine hit the cabin wall. She looked for a weapon, but her axe was in the snow 10 yards away. The driver's door of the lead vehicle opened. A boot hit the ground, polished black leather. Then a man stepped out. He was massive. He had to be nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark tactical coat. His hair was black, swept back from a face that was brutally handsome. Sharp angles, a square jaw, and skin pale as the moon. But it was his aura that brought Imogen to her knees. It washed over her like a tidal wave. Power, raw and unfiltered. It was the scent of ozone, rain, and fresh blood. Alpha. An alpha so powerful that Phineas Greywell would look like a puppy beside him. 3 other men exited the other vehicles. One was lean and scarred, moving with the grace of a knife fighter, Orion Whitvale. Another was a giant with a shaved head. The 4th was younger, with restless energy. They all wore black. They all moved with lethal coordination. They weren't looking at Imogen. They were looking at the pup. Imogen scrambled forward, placing herself between the massive strangers and Shadow. "Don't touch him!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's just a stray. He didn't do anything." The leader, the giant in the front, stopped. He looked at Imogen. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but she felt his gaze burn through her. "Step aside, little wolf," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated in her chest. "No," Imogen said, trembling. "You're not taking him." The man tilted his head. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were silver, liquid mercury. "I am Neville Crestgate," he said. "Alpha of the Obsidian Pack." Imogen's breath hitched. The Obsidian Pack. They were a myth, a pack of mercenaries and monsters who lived in the mountains to the north. They were said to be cursed, unable to produce heirs, slowly dying out, but taking half the world with them. They were the most feared shifters in existence. "Why are you here?" Imogen whispered. Neville didn't answer her. He looked past her, at the pup sitting on the porch. The pup stood up. He walked down the steps, moving past Imogen. She tried to grab him, but Neville raised a hand, and an invisible wall of air gently pushed her back. Shadow walked up to Neville. The massive alpha dropped to one knee in the snow, ignoring the slush soaking his expensive trousers. He lowered his head, baring his neck, a sign of ultimate submission. Behind him, Orion and the other 2 men did the same. They fell to their knees, heads bowed low. Neville spoke to the pup, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you were lost to the void. We have searched for 3 moons. The pup looked at Neville, then looked back at Imogen. The air around the pup began to shimmer. Black smoke curled off his fur. Bones cracked and reformed. The small, scrawny body elongated, twisted, and grew. Imogen watched in horror and awe as the pup stood up on 2 legs. The fur receded into pale skin. The snout retracted. Standing in the snow where the dog had been was not a child, but a man. He was lean, stark naked, and shaking from the transformation. He looked to be about 20, with dark hair and those same violet eyes. But his body was covered in complex, glowing black runes, curses, binding him. He wasn't a pet. He was Jocasta Valehaven's missing ward, the oracle of the Obsidian Pack. The young man collapsed forward, and Neville caught him effortlessly, wrapping his heavy coat around him. Neville looked up at Imogen, who was paralyzed against the cabin wall. "You fed him," Neville said. "It wasn't a question. You kept the Curse-Eater alive with your own rations. I thought he was a dog," Imogen stammered. Neville stood, holding the unconscious young man in his arms like a child. He turned to his men. "Secure the perimeter. If Silver Pine sends scouts, peel their skin off." "Yes, Alpha," Orion said, his voice cold death. Neville turned back to Imogen. He walked toward her, towering over her small frame. Up close, he was terrifying. Beautiful, but terrifying. "You have done the Obsidian Pack a service that cannot be repaid with gold," Neville said. He reached out, his large hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her frozen cheek. His touch was shockingly warm. "Pack your things," he commanded. "What?" Imogen blinked. "Where are you taking me?" Neville's mercury eyes locked onto hers. "War is coming to these woods, Imogen Ashridge. Phineas knows what you found. He will come for you to get to the boy, and I will not leave my debt unpaid." He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "You fed the pup every day. Now the wolves are here to feed you." The engine of the lead SUV roared to life, sounding like a beast waking from slumber. Imogen looked at the cabin, her prison, her sanctuary, and then at the hand Neville offered her. 4 black wolves had pulled up to her cabin, and Imogen knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she would never be the invisible girl again. The interior of the SUV was a shock to the system, a violent transition from the biting honesty of the wind to a womb of heated leather and silence. Imogen sat rigidly in the back seat, her hand still clutching the edges of her threadbare coat, as if the luxury surrounding her was a trick, a hallucination brought on by hypothermia. Beside her, the young man, the Oracle Neville had called him, slept with a stillness that resembled death. His head lolled against the window, the strange glowing runes on his skin pulsing faintly like dying embers. In the front passenger seat, Neville Crestgate was a monolith. He hadn't spoken since they pulled away from the cabin, leaving her old life to be swallowed by the snowstorm. He was on a satellite phone, his voice low, issuing commands in a language that sounded like Russian mixed with something far older. "Secure the perimeter. No witnesses," Neville murmured, then hung up. He turned slightly, his silver eyes catching hers in the rearview mirror. "You're shivering." "I'm fine," Imogen lied. Her teeth were chattering so hard her jaw ached. Neville tapped a console. The temperature in the car rose instantly, a tropical wave that made Imogen's frozen skin prickle with pins and needles. He reached into a compartment and pulled out a silver flask and a protein bar wrapped in gold foil. He passed them back. "Eat. Drink. It's nutrient-dense. Your body is eating itself, Imogen." She took them, her fingers brushing his. Again, that jolt of heat. It wasn't just static. It was a hum, a biological recognition that made her wolf, buried deep and silent for a year, stir in its grave. "Who is he?" Imogen asked, nodding toward the sleeping boy, desperate to distract herself from the Alpha's overwhelming presence. "You called him a curse-eater." Neville sighed, a sound like a shifting tectonic plate. "His name is Calum. He is the last of the Void Walkers. My pack. We are not like yours, Imogen. The Obsidian bloodline is potent, but it is unstable. We generate more magic than our bodies can contain. Without a tether, without an oracle to siphon the excess energy, we go mad. We burn from the inside out." Imogen stared at Calum's rune-marked skin. "So he's a battery?" "He is a savior," Neville corrected, his voice sharp. "He was stolen from us 6 months ago. We thought he was dead. If he had died, every wolf in my pack would have turned feral within a year. We would have become monsters that required putting down." He turned fully in his seat now, ignoring the road as the driver navigated the treacherous ice with supernatural precision. "You didn't just feed a stray dog, Imogen. You sustained the anchor of the most dangerous pack on the continent. You gave him your own life force, whether you knew it or not. That soup, it wasn't just broth. It was intent. Care. That is the only magic strong enough to bind a Void Walker." Imogen looked down at her hands, They were scarred, red, and rough. I just didn't want him to be alone. And that, Neville said softly, is why you are now under my protection. Phineas Greywell threw away a queen to chase a trophy, and he is going to learn the price of that error. The car swerved slightly as they hit the main highway, the tires humming against the asphalt. Imogen looked out the window. They were heading north, toward the jagged peaks of the Black Mountains, toward the Obsidian territory. She unwrapped the protein bar. It tasted like chocolate and ash. She took a bite, and for the first time in a year, she allowed herself to hope. But hope, she knew, was a dangerous thing. It was sharper than ice, and it cut deeper. They drove for 4 hours, climbing higher until the trees turned into twisted, ancient sentinels, and the air grew thin. The convoy didn't stop at a gate. Instead, the face of a sheer granite cliff seemed to dissolve, a hologram masking a massive tunnel entrance. The SUVs sped through, emerging into a hidden valley that stole the breath from Imogen's lungs. It wasn't a village. It was a citadel. Structures of dark glass and steel jutted from the rock face, integrating seamlessly with the mountain. Waterfalls, frozen in mid-cascade, framed a central keep that looked like a fallen star. Lights glowed warm and amber from within the structures, and despite the altitude, the valley was green. Geothermal vents, Imogen realized. They heated the entire valley floor. "Welcome to the Onyx Citadel," Neville said, as the car came to a halt in a pristine underground garage. The door opened, and Imogen stepped out. Her legs were jelly. Orion Whitvale was there instantly, opening the back door for Kylam. He lifted the boy with a gentleness that belied the scars on his face. "Get him to the infirmary," Neville commanded. "Tell Jocasta he's stable but weak." "And the girl?" Orion asked, his eyes flicking to Imogen. "The girl," a voice echoed from the elevator bank, "will come with me." An older woman stepped forward. She was striking, with hair like spun silver piled high on her head and robes of deep purple wool. She leaned on a cane topped with a raw black diamond. But it was her eyes that held Imogen. They were entirely white, no iris, no pupil. "Jocasta," Neville said, bowing his head slightly. "You found him," Jocasta said, her voice sounding like wind through a canyon. She walked past the Alpha and stopped in front of Imogen. She didn't look at Imogen's face. She looked through her. "She is broken," Jocasta stated flatly. Imogen bristled. "I'm standing, aren't I?" Jocasta smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "The vessel is cracked, child. Your wolf is dormant, starved into a coma by rejection and sorrow. But the core—" She reached out, a withered hand hovering over Imogen's heart. "The core is iron. You fed the oracle. You gave him the crumbs of your own survival." "She needs rest, Jocasta," Neville interrupted, stepping between them as if to shield Imogen. "And food, real food." "She needs to remember who she is," Jocasta countered. "Take her to the guest spire. I will send the attendants." Neville guided Imogen toward a glass elevator. The ride up was dizzying. The entire valley spread out below them, a secret kingdom of impossible wealth and power. "I don't belong here," Imogen whispered, clutching the railing. "I lived in a shack with a dirt floor, Neville. I don't know how to be. This." Neville stood behind her, his reflection towering over hers in the glass. He didn't touch her, but his heat radiated against her back. "You survived the dead woods alone," he said, his voice rumbling against her spine. "These people down here, they were born into power. You forged yours in the cold. Do not lower your head to anyone here, Imogen, not even me." The elevator opened into a penthouse suite, larger than her entire former cabin. A fire roared in a stone hearth. A massive bed was piled with furs. "Rest," Neville said. "Dinner is at 8. I will come for you." He left her there. Imogen walked into the bathroom. It was a cathedral of marble. She turned on the tap, and hot water, glorious, steaming water, filled the tub. She stripped off her filthy clothes. She looked at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Her ribs were prominent. Her skin was pale and mapped with the scars of frost nip and the scrapes of survival. She looked like a ghost. She sank into the water. And for the first time in 365 days, Imogen Ashridge cried. She cried for the girl she had been, the mate she had lost, and the terrifying, unknown future that was rushing toward her like an avalanche. Dinner was a private affair, served in Neville's personal quarters. Imogen had been scrubbed, polished, and dressed by efficient, silent attendants. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet that hung loosely on her frame, but the fabric was soft, and it hid the worst of her angles. Neville was waiting for her at a long table made of obsidian. He had changed into a black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. They ate in silence for a while. Imogen ate slowly, fighting the urge to wolf down the roasted lamb and root vegetables. Every bite was an explosion of flavor that made her head spin. "Calum is awake," Neville said, pouring her a glass of dark red wine. "He asked for you. Is he okay?" "He is weak, but he is coherent. He told us how he escaped his captors. He told us he walked for miles until he smelled kindness." Neville looked at her over the rim of his glass. "He said you smelled like hope." Imogen blushed, looking down at her plate. "He was hungry." "Phineas Greywell has contacted the council," Neville said abruptly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Imogen dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the stone. "What?" "He claims the Obsidian Pack kidnapped a vulnerable member of his pack. He claims you were mentally unstable and that we abducted you to hold for ransom." "That liar!" Imogen stood up, her hands shaking. "He threw me out. He publicly rejected me. There are witnesses." "He destroyed the records," Neville said calmly. "According to Silver Pine's official logs, you were sent to a sanitarium for your own health. He is spinning a narrative, Imogen. He knows that if the council finds out he rejected a mate who then saved the Obsidian Oracle, he will be stripped of his alpha status. He is trying to get ahead of the truth." "He'll come for me," Imogen whispered. "He'll drag me back." Neville stood up. He moved around the table with predatory speed. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the storm on his skin. "Let him come," Neville growled. "I have 400 enforcers who are itching for a fight. I have been looking for a reason to dismantle Silver Pine for years." He reached out and took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was possessive, electric. "Show me," he said. "Show you what?" "The mark. The mating mark he rejected." Imogen flinched. The mark was a jagged scar on her shoulder where the bond had been ripped away. It was ugly. It was a brand of shame. "No," she whispered. "Imogen," Neville said, his thumb stroking her jawline. "I need to see the damage to know the debt." Slowly, with trembling fingers, Imogen lowered the strap of her velvet dress. The scar was there, pale and raised against her skin. Neville stared at it. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. A low growl started in his chest, a sound so deep it vibrated the wine in the glasses. "He didn't just break the bond," Neville murmured, his voice thick with fury. "He used a severance blade. This is torture, Imogen. This is illegal, even by the old laws." He leaned down. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, Imogen thought he was going to bite her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the scar. He didn't kiss it. He rested there, his breathing heavy, as if he was inhaling her pain. I will take his head for this, Neville vowed into her skin. Suddenly, the door to the dining room burst open. Orion stood there, chest heaving, his face pale. Alpha, you need to come to the infirmary. Now. Neville pulled back, his eyes instantly clearing, shifting from lover to general. What is it? It's the boy, Orion said, looking at Imogen with wide, fearful eyes. He's trancing, and he's screaming her name. Neville grabbed Imogen's hand. Come. They ran through the corridors, the stone blurring past them. When they reached the infirmary, the air was heavy with ozone and the smell of burning sage. Calum was thrashing on the bed, restrained by 2 healers. His eyes were wide open, glowing with that blinding electric violet light. The runes on his body were searing bright, casting erratic shadows on the walls. When Imogen entered, Calum froze. His head snapped toward her. The crown! Calum shrieked, his voice not his own. It was a chorus of 1,000 whispers. The crown of bone is coming. He pointed a shaking finger at Imogen. The wolfless queen! Calum gasped, his back arching off the bed. She carries the winter in her blood. Beware the red moon, Alpha. Beware the man with the silver tongue. He brings the hunters. He brings the collars. Calum collapsed back onto the pillows, seizing. Neville rushed to the boy's side, placing a hand on his chest to ground him. He looked back at Imogen, his face grim. What does that mean? Imogen asked, terrified. It means, Neville said, that Phineas isn't working alone. And he isn't just coming for you, Imogen. He's coming for us all. Outside, the wind howled against the glass of the citadel, but this time it sounded less like the weather and more like the gathering of a darker, hungrier pack. The warning from the oracle was not a prophecy of the distant future. It was a weather report for a storm that had already made landfall. By dawn, the Onyx citadel was a hive of controlled chaos. The serene silence of the mountain retreat shattered under the weight of impending war. The hunters Calum had screamed about were quickly identified by the Obsidian Pack's scouts, a mercenary battalion known as the Iron Collars. They were human shifter hybrids, outcasts banned by the High Council for their brutality and lack of honor. Phineas Greywell had emptied the Silver Pine coffers to hire them. He wasn't coming to retrieve a lost pack member. He was coming to erase the evidence of his cruelty. Imogen stood on the balcony of the guest spire, the biting wind whipping her hair across her face. Below, the valley floor had transformed. Gone were the leisurely strolls of pack members. In their place, enforcers clad in matte black tactical armor moved in synchronized drills. Neville was down there, a general among soldiers, his presence commanding absolute loyalty. He moved with a lethal grace, checking weapons, clasping shoulders, his silver eyes missing nothing. You look like a queen surveying her kingdom before the siege. Imogen turned. Orion Whitvale leaned against the glass door, casually sharpening a long, curved dagger with a whetstone. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. I feel like a target, Imogen admitted, her voice trembling slightly. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from dread. If I surrender to Phineas, if I walk out there, will he leave you alone? Orion laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against the tension. He paused his sharpening, looking at her with eyes that had seen too much death. Neville would burn the world to ash before he let you go, Imogen. And not just because of the debt you're owed for saving Calum. Then why? Because you woke him up, Orion said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. He's been sleepwalking for a decade, lost in the duty of keeping us from going feral. You made him feel something other than burden. If you leave, the monster in him doesn't go back to sleep. It tears everything apart looking for you. Before she could answer, a siren wailed, a low, mournful sound that echoed off the valley walls like a dying beast. "They are here." Imogen ran to the railing. At the far end of the valley, the holographic camouflage that hid the entrance flickered violently and died. The illusion of solid rock dissolved, revealing the grey, churning sky. A convoy of heavy armoured trucks, led by Phineas's sleek silver sedan, breached the perimeter. They had bypassed the tunnel codes. They had a traitor on the inside, or technology the Council didn't know existed. Neville's voice boomed over the valley's PA system, calm, terrifying, and utterly devoid of mercy. Defensive Formation Alpha, lethal force authorized, protect the Oracle, protect the guest. Imogen didn't hesitate. She turned back into the room, scanning for anything she could use. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It felt pathetic against claws and guns, a relic of a simpler time. But she refused to hide under the bed while they fought for her. She ran for the elevator, stabbing the button, but the lights overhead flickered and died. The citadel groaned as the power was cut. "Imogen!" The voice didn't come from the room. It roared inside her skull. She gasped, clutching her head, stumbling against the wall. It was a sensation like a physical blow, followed by a rush of warm, dark water. The mind link, a connection that shouldn't exist for a rejected wolf. "Neville," she thought, the name projecting outward before she could stop it. "Stay where you are." His mental voice was a command, heavy with alpha authority and panic. "They have breached the lower levels." "Stay in the spire. I'm not staying," she shouted back across the psychic bond, surprised by the clarity of her own projection. "I know Phineas. He doesn't want a fight. He wants a trophy. He'll come for the heart of the home." "Imogen, do not—" She blocked him out, focusing on her feet. She took the stairs, running down flight after flight in the emergency lighting, her lungs burning, her grip on the iron poker white-knuckled. She burst into the main atrium just as the massive glass doors shattered inward. Shards of crystal rained down like diamonds. Phineas Greywell stepped through the ruin, flanked by 4 hulking mercenaries, wielding crackling shock batons. He looked impeccable in a grey wool coat, his handsome face twisted into a sneer of triumph that didn't quite reach his eyes. Beside him, Helene looked less confident. She held a pistol, but her hand shook, her eyes darting around the dark, oppressive hall of the Obsidian Pack. "Imogen," Phineas purred, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "You look healthy. Fattened up by your new masters. Did they treat you well before they decided to sell you back?" "Get out, Phineas," Imogen said, stepping over the broken glass. She raised the iron poker, her stance wide. "You have no authority here. The Council will have your head for this." "I have the authority of the victor," Phineas spat, stepping closer. "Neville is busy at the gate dealing with the distraction. My men are planting charges on the geothermal vents. I'm going to bury this place, under the mountain. But first I'm taking you back." He gestured to the mercenaries. "Grab her. Gently. The Council needs a tragedy, and a rogue kidnapping victim dying in a tragic rescue attempt fits the bill perfectly. But I want to have some fun with her first." She is not going anywhere. Shadows coalesced behind Imogen. The darkness seemed to detach itself from the corners of the room, knitting together into a form. Neville emerged, blood on his hands, his shirt torn to ribbons. He moved in front of her, a wall of pure, lethal rage. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a god of war. "Ah, the great Obsidian Alpha," Phineas mocked, though he took a subtle step back. "You look tired, Neville. Bleeding already?" Neville wiped blood from his jaw, blood that wasn't his. "I am just warming up." He didn't wait for a signal. He didn't monologue. He lunged. The atrium exploded into violence. Neville shifted mid-air, a seamless transition from man to beast. His massive black wolf form collided with the two lead mercenaries. The sound of snapping bone was sickeningly loud. The shock batons sparked uselessly against his thick, magically dense fur. He was a whirlwind of shadow and teeth, tearing through the hired guns with terrifying efficiency. But Phineas was quick, and he was a coward. He shifted into his grey wolf form, sleek, fast, and built for running. He didn't attack Neville. He didn't help his hired men. He lunged for Imogen. Imogen swung the poker with all her strength. It connected hard with Phineas's muzzle, a satisfying crack echoing through the hall. He yelped, stumbling back, shaking his head, but he recovered instantly, snarling. Anger replaced surprise. He leaped again, his weight slamming into her chest. Imogen hit the marble floor hard, the breath driven from her lungs. The poker clattered away, out of reach. Phineas pinned her, his claws digging into her shoulders, his jaws snapping inches from her throat. His hot breath smelled of rot and old blood. "Die, you useless thing!" Phineas's voice echoed in her head, a vile intrusion. "You should have frozen in that cabin." Imogen struggled, kicking, scratching, but he was too heavy. She looked over Phineas's shoulder and saw Neville buried under 3 fresh mercenaries who had poured in from the breach. They were shocking him, beating him, keeping him down. Neville roared, a sound of pure anguish as he felt her fear through the bond. "No!" Neville screamed in her mind. Phineas clamped his jaws down on her shoulder, the same shoulder he had scarred with the blade a year ago. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded through Imogen. It was a physical agony, yes, but it was also a psychic violation. He was trying to mark her again, to claim her as property. But beneath the pain, something else broke. The dam that the rejection had built, the wall of shame, silence, and sorrow, shattered. The year of starving in the cold, of believing she was broken, of thinking she was wolfless, it all dissolved. The core that Jocasta had seen, the iron core, ignited. Imogen didn't scream. She roared. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was the sound of a glacier cracking. A blast of cold, colder than the deadwoods, colder than space, erupted from her body. It wasn't just wind. It was absolute zero. Phineas was thrown off her as if hit by a freight train. He crashed into a stone pillar 20 feet away. He scrambled up, his fur frosted with sudden ice, his movements sluggish. He looked at her, eyes wide with confusion and primal fear. Imogen stood up. She didn't shift. She didn't need to. Her skin was glowing with a pale blue light, veins of frost tracing patterns up her neck. Her eyes, once a warm brown, were now a blinding, icy white. No pupil, no iris, just the void. "I am not wolfless," Imogen said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded like the wind howling through a canyon, layered and ancient. "I am the winter." She raised a hand. The moisture in the air froze instantly. Sharp icicles, distinct and lethal as spears, formed in the air around her, hovering in a deadly arc. "Leave!" she commanded. Phineas scrambled back, shifting back into human form in his panic, naked and shivering violently. What are you?" "I am the queen you threw away," she whispered. She thrust her hand forward. The icicles flew. They didn't kill him. She wasn't a murderer, not yet, but they pinned him to the wall. One through the sleeve of his coat, which lay near him, one through the meat of his thigh, and 2 crossing over his chest, trapping him in a cage of unbreakable ice. The mercenaries, seeing their leader pinned by an Omega wielding elemental magic, stopped their assault on Neville. They looked at the glowing woman, dropped their weapons, and fled into the night. Neville, now back in human form, panted heavily. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, his chest heaving. He looked at Imogen, awe written across his blood-streaked face. He didn't approach her with fear, but with reverence. "Imogen?" he asked softly. The glow faded. The ice in her eyes melted back to brown. Imogen collapsed, the adrenaline leaving her all at once. Neville caught her before she hit the ground, falling to his knees to cradle her against his chest. "I got him," she mumbled into his torn shirt, her voice small again. "Yes," Neville breathed, kissing the top of her head, rocking her gently. "You got him. You got them all." The aftermath of the Battle of Onyx Citadel was swift and decisive. The High Council arrived within the hour, alerted by Jocasta, who had been broadcasting the entire assault via the Oracle's vision directly to the council chambers. There was no spinning this narrative. Phineas Greywell was found pinned to the wall by ice that refused to melt. He was stripped of his title, his lands, and his freedom on the spot. The evidence of his illegal dealings with mercenaries, combined with the testimony of his own beta, Helene, who turned on him the moment the ice spears flew, begging for mercy, sealed his fate. He was sentenced to the Void Prison, a dimension of endless grey mist from which no wolf returned. As they dragged him away, he looked back at Imogen, but she didn't meet his eyes. She was looking at the mountains. 2 days later, Imogen sat in the infirmary balcony, wrapped in a blanket of thick grey wool. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion. Calum sat on the railing next to her, swinging his legs over the drop. He was eating a green apple, the runes on his skin humming with a contented, low light. "I told you," Calum said with a grin, juice running down his chin. "Crown of bone, or ice. Close enough. The prophecy is rarely literal, you know." "You could have warned me about the turning into a blizzard part," Imogen said dryly. "And spoil the surprise? Never." Calum hopped down. "He's coming. Look busy." He vanished around the corner just as the door opened. Neville walked in. He had been healed, though a new, thin, white scar ran down his cheek, a matching mark to the one Imogen carried on her shoulder. He wore a simple black sweater and trousers, stripped of the armor and the pomp of leadership. He didn't say anything at first. He walked to the railing and stood beside her, looking out over the repaired valley. The snow was falling again, soft and gentle, covering the scars of the battle. "The pack is asking," Neville said quietly. "Asking what?" Imogen pulled the blanket tighter. "If I'm a witch? If I'm a monster?" "No," Neville turned to her. "They are asking who you are to us, to me." Imogen looked at him. "I'm Imogen. Just Imogen, the girl who made soup." "No," Neville said. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold that now lived inside her. He interlaced their fingers. "You are the one who fed the Oracle. You are the one who defended the Citadel. You are the mate of the Obsidian Alpha." Imogen's breath hitched. "Are you offering me a job, Neville?" Neville chuckled, a warm, rich sound that vibrated in the crisp air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of raw meteorite iron, dark and textured, set with a piece of polished blue glass. No, not glass. It was a piece of the ice she had summoned, captured and enchanted, so it would never melt. He knelt on one knee. "I am offering you a crown," Neville said, his silver eyes locking onto hers, "and my heart, and my life. We are broken things, Imogen. You, me, this pack. We are the jagged edges that don't fit anywhere else. But broken things have sharper edges. We fit together." He squeezed her hand. "Be my queen. Not because of a contract, not because of politics, but because when I look at you, I see the only thing that has ever made sense in this frozen world. Imogen looked at the ring, then at the man who had seen a queen when the world saw a beggar. She felt the cold inside her, her wolf, her winter, purr with contentment. "I don't need a crown," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "I just need the wolf." "You have him," Neville promised against her skin. "Forever." She let him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, cool and heavy. Neville stood and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of snow and promise. Outside, the wind howled, but for the first time in her life, Imogen didn't fear the storm. She was the storm, and the storm was finally home. Imogen Ashridge's journey from a frozen porch to the throne of the Obsidian Pack teaches us a powerful truth. Rejection is not a definition. It is a redirection. The world may strip you of your titles, your comfort, and your name, but it cannot strip you of your inherent worth. Kindness, even when given in the darkest of winters to the smallest of creatures, is a seed that grows into a forest of salvation. Imogen didn't become a queen because she married an alpha. She attracted an alpha because she was already a queen in spirit. Her power lay not in her ability to shift, but in her ability to endure, to nurture, and finally, to stand. True power isn't about claws or crowns. It's about the courage to remain soft in a world that wants to freeze you solid, and the wisdom to know when to let the winter out. Did Imogen's transformation give you chills? If you believe in love that conquers curses, hit that like button. Share this story with your pack, and subscribe for more tales of romance, magic, and destiny.